Hi Internet. So this is just a video of me testing all of my consoles. Well, most of my consoles. I don't test every single console I own. Just the major ones. We're starting with the 2600, which this is the 2600 Junior, and it's a piece of junk. It doesn't work very well. I'm not entirely sure what's wrong with it. The picture barely comes in sometimes. You have to kind of mess with the buttons to get a picture to appear. And when it does appear, as you can see, there's a ton of noise, a ton of grain, and none of the other buttons on the system seem to actually do anything. Something is loose inside of this thing. I took it apart, but I couldn't find what it was. I'm assuming at some point some type of cap blew in there because this thing is like 40, 50 years old at this point. But it's still just a neat little thing to have, but I'll just play on my 7800 if I want to play a 2600 game. Next up is the Atari 5200. As I've stated many times in the past, I absolutely adore this thing, and it does work. However, it requires the occasional, just random reset in order to get it to function properly. I'm not entirely sure why, just sometimes it happens. Sometimes it works perfectly the first time, and sometimes it takes a little bit to get going. Oh, and as you can see, I was changing the channel, so I might have just had it on the wrong channel, but there's Star Wars. It does work. Next up, we have the Atari 7800. This thing actually works beautifully. It starts up right away. I have no issues with it whatsoever. There's Centipede playing for the 7800. I actually quite enjoy this little console. It's also great because it also plays 2600 games. I believe right now, yep, I'm going to grab Ghostbusters again to plop that in and see if it works. I always have a tendency to put these things in the wrong way first try. It's like a USB. I don't entirely know why I do this, it just happens. But as you can see, popping in a 2600 game, it does work. So, this is how I play my 2600 games if I really want to. Sticking in the realm of Atari, we have my beloved Atari Jaguar. I really need to get a dust cover for the main cartridge opening, but the Jaguar fires up perfectly. I try to keep this one in best of condition as I can because it's one of the more rare consoles I own, and I do quite enjoy having it. And I don't have a ton of games for them, but the ones I do are a lot of fun. This is Dino Dudes, and it's a fun little game, and I really enjoy having this console. I look forward to collecting for it whenever I can. Next up is the Super Nintendo. Fun fact, this was the first console I bought to start collecting, something like 9 years ago at this point. This console doesn't work extremely well, at least the one I have doesn't. Sometimes it takes a few tries to get a game to load. It does eventually work, but it requires some, a bit of a force to get it to use. Sometimes you need to move the cartridge in the right way. Sometimes you need to reset the system a few times. It really just depends on how the system is feeling at that very moment. But eventually, it does load up, and I'm able to play my Super Nintendo games. So, yeah. Also, I don't have a working NES at this moment. For whatever reason, my NES like crapped out on me. I think a cap broke inside of it because I heard something pop when I turned it on one day. So I'm in the process of getting a new one of those. Genesis. Not much to say here. It's a Genesis Model 2. Works perfectly fine. Not much to really say here. It's playing Sonic. Fun little console. Next up is the 32X, and I was actually having quite an issue with this console, and I was kind of freaking out inside because this thing just was not producing a signal, and I had no clue what was going on. I tried resetting it, turning it off, turning it on, cleaning the cartridge, cleaning the base multiple times, and I think finally I was just like, oh, let me check the connections to make sure that the connections are making a good contact. And would you believe it? I didn't have it plugged in fully. So you'll see that in a few moments. I reach around the console and I'm like, what the hell is this? And Sure enough, there it is. I push in the video connector and it starts right up. I was really worried that this was broken because these things are kind of rare, and to find them in working condition is even rarer. And I really like the 32X, so I'm really happy that this is still functioning just fine. Next up is the Nintendo 64. This thing works beautifully. No real complaints at all, just occasionally the games have to be cleaned before being put in. But other than that, works just fine. Next up is the Saturn. This has been modified to use a optical drive emulator that runs off a little SD card. So when you power it powers on like a normal Sega Saturn would, but it boots off an SD card, so you can load games and ROMs and all that good stuff on it. I love this thing. I think it's fun. It was a neat little modding project to do. I have a video on my channel about it. So yeah, go and watch that. Next up is the PlayStation 1. I absolutely love this little guy. In it is Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 for the PS1. I've been playing a bunch of Tony Hawk recently because they just announced the remakes of 3 and 4, and I am very excited for that because Tony Hawk is my childhood. I grew up playing those systems. You'll notice I tried to turn it on without powering the thing up first because I'm a bit of a dunce, but it works just fine. The PlayStation logo and Sony logo come screaming in. Everything works perfectly, and I love Sony systems. They are, in my opinion, superior. Speaking of Sony systems, here we have a bunch of PlayStation 2s. Now, I have 4 of these things. I have the black Slim, the silver Slim, the white Slim, and the fat black. And the fat black one is modified to use a hard drive to boot games, and it boots off of a little SATA M.2 SSD, and it runs FreeMcBoot off of the memory card, so you can load games off of a hard drive. You can rip games directly from discs, and I have a bunch of them because I have one from my brother who found one and gave me one. The black one I've owned since I was 8. So that thing is, really old. The white one I got a couple years ago, and the fat black one I got fairly recently in the grand scheme of things. I got it maybe a year ago, and I did a whole video on turning it into to run off a hard drive. So you can go find that video. I'll have it linked below. But as you can see, the FreeMcBoot pops right up, and eventually the PlayStation 2 logo will come screaming in, and you can do a lot with these FreeMcBoot memory cards. I highly recommend getting one. They're only like $10 on Amazon. Next up is the original Xbox. As you can see, I don't have the date set on this thing once it eventually loads up, but it does work, and it actually works very well. It boots up like immediately. I was very shocked about that, and it works just fine. I just don't use it that often, so haven't really set the date on it. But it is a neat console. It's a bit dirty though, but it does work. Next up is the GameCube. I actually have 3 of these things, a silver one, a black one, and I have a modded one that runs off of a Raspberry Pi Pico, which I did a whole video on a couple years ago of me modding it. I think that was like my 100 subscriber video or something like that. But anyways, I have just a couple stock ones that work just fine. And, I mean, they're GameCubes. They don't break very easily. You can throw these things down a flight of stairs and they won't so much as, bat an eye. And, yeah, so here I am just plugging it in. And I'm going to start it right up, because I always hit the wrong button. And here comes the GameCube logo. And this one has been sitting for a while, so I haven't set the time or anything, but it does work. Last up for consoles on this TV, we have the Wii. I actually have 3 of them. I have a Wii Mini, a white Wii, and the red Wii. I primarily use the white Wii just because it has all my saves on it, but as I was powering up the red Wii, I first pressed the wrong button and then decided, oh, I should check to see if there's any discs in the disc tray, because I got this thing semi-recently, and I don't really I don't think I ever checked to see what was in there. So I ejected, and sure enough, there was a disc inside, and it was Super Mario All Stars. So pleasantly surprised about that. I don't have a copy of that, so that's pretty neat. Over on the main TV, this is my PS3. Had this thing for well over a decade. Works just fine. Soul Calibur 4. First game I ever got for PlayStation 3. This whole thing just runs like a charm. Bit dirty, but that's okay. And I have it modified to run off of an SSD. Now, right now I have the Destiny PS4 plugged in, but I can't get a controller to pair with it for some odd reason. Not entirely sure what's going on, but I'm sitting here trying a controller multiple times. I have two PS4 controllers, and eventually I try a PS5 controller, and I just can't seem to get the thing to pair. I don't know if it just needs a new controller or if something's broke inside, but I mean, the system does work. I was using it last year just fine. So I'm not entirely sure what happened. So maybe I just need a new controller. Here's my Pokemon Switch. For a while I was sitting here with a detecting device, and it wasn't turning on, and eventually I realized I had to kind of make the system realize it was awake and, sort of move it so that it powered up correctly. But it does work just fine. This one is my R2D2 Xbox 360. I got this thing like a month ago. I just found it out in the wild and decided to get it. I caught the video kind of late in it starting up, but it works just fine. And finally, here is my PlayStation 5. I know this works because I've been using it fairly regularly, so I wasn't afraid that this thing would fail at all. Anyways, so that's me testing all of my major consoles, well, most of them, to make sure that they still function after all these years. I was mainly worried about the older ones and not so much about the newer ones, though the PS4 is kind of troubling me, but hey, things happen. So yeah, not sure when normal videos will resume, just because I'm still looking for a job, so stay tuned for any updates, and thank you very much for watching. Have a lovely day.